Have you ever wondered what dark secrets are hidden within the Christmas season? From eerie phenomena to true terrifying tales, uncover 3 chilling stories that will make you rethink the holiday spirit. Get ready for the most unforgettable and haunting experiences you've ever heard. Story 1. The Stranger. Beneath the Christmas Tree. It was December 24th, Christmas Eve. The snow had blanketed the town of Evergreen Falls, and the chill in the air was enough to make anyone hurry back indoors. I've always loved Christmas. The lights, the music, the warm embrace of family. It was all magical. But that year felt off. My parents were hosting a Christmas party that evening. Guests arrived, filling the house with laughter and cheer. I, however, found myself retreating to my room. The constant chatter and festive noise felt overwhelming, so I decided to take a break. My room, dimly lit with a string of fairy lights, was my sanctuary. From my window, I could see the neighbors' yards lit up with glowing reindeer and snowmen. As I sat by my desk, scrolling through my phone, a faint sound caught my attention. It wasn't the music from downstairs or the laughter of the guests. It was something else. A faint rustling, as if something was shifting inside the house. Thinking it was my cat, Oliver, I brushed it off, but as the minutes ticked by, the sound grew louder, a soft crunching, followed by a tap, tap, tap. It seemed to be coming from the living room where the Christmas tree stood. Curiosity and unease bubbled inside me. Quietly, I left my room and made my way down the dimly lit hallway. The house felt eerily still, despite the muffled noise of the party in the background. When I reached the living room, my heart skipped a beat. The tree stood tall, adorned with shimmering ornaments and twinkling lights. But there was something strange. The lower branches were shaking ever so slightly, as if something, or someone, was hiding beneath it. "Oliver," I whispered, my voice trembling. No response. I crouched down slowly, peering under the tree. For a moment, all I could see were the neatly wrapped presents. But then, my eyes caught movement, a shadow, and then a face. A man was crouched under the tree, his pale skin contrasting sharply against the darkness. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and locked onto mine. His lips curled into a grotesque smile, revealing teeth that looked unnaturally sharp. I stumbled backward, my breath hitching in my throat. I tried to scream, but the sound was caught in my chest. The man didn't move. He just stayed there, smiling, as if mocking my fear. Summoning my courage, I turned and bolted toward the party, my heart pounding like a drum. When I reached the living room filled with guests, I tried to explain what I had seen. My parents, thinking it was a prank or a misunderstanding, brushed it off. Some of the guests chuckled, assuming it was just a tale to add some spookiness to the holiday. But I knew what I saw. Determined to prove I wasn't imagining things, I returned to the living room with my father. The tree looked untouched. No sign of the man. My father even crouched down to check beneath the branches, but found nothing. "Maybe you're just tired, sweetheart," he said, patting my shoulder. "Get some rest." I nodded reluctantly and returned to my room. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind made me jump. Hours passed, and the party wound down. The guests left, and the house grew silent. Around 3 a.m., my eyes fluttered open. A chill ran down my spine. Something felt wrong. I glanced at my door, which I had left slightly ajar. It was now fully open, and then I heard it. The sound of breathing. Slow. Steady. Coming from inside my room. My heart raced as I reached for my phone, using its light to scan the room. In the corner, near my closet, stood the man. He was taller than I remembered, his frame looming in the darkness. His grin was wider now, almost impossibly so, and in his hand, he held one of the ornaments from the tree. I screamed, finally finding my voice. My parents rushed in, turning on the lights. But once again, the man was gone. My mother tried to comfort me, but I could see the worry in her eyes. My father checked every corner of the house but found no sign of an intruder. The next morning, as we tried to move past the unsettling events, my father decided to inspect the tree more closely. Beneath it, among the gifts, he found a small, wrapped box that no one recognized. Curious and cautious, he opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for letting me in. I'll see you again next Christmas." We left Evergreen Falls before the new year, selling the house and never looking back. But every Christmas, I still feel the weight of those unblinking eyes watching me, no matter where I am. Story 2. The Christmas Eve Disappearance Expanded. It was the winter of 1995 when my uncle, Martin, invited me to spend Christmas with them in the small town of Westfield, Vermont. I had always loved Christmas, family, laughter, and the smell of pine and cinnamon filling the house. But this year, something felt off from the moment I stepped through the front door. The house, a grand 2-story Victorian that had been passed down through my aunt's family, stood like a silent witness to years of holiday cheer. There were framed pictures of smiling faces, dusty old books, and a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. The scent of roasted turkey lingered in the air, and Christmas music softly played in the background. But as I glanced around the house, something felt heavy. The quiet was almost too much, pressing down on me like a thick blanket. The kind of quiet you feel when something or someone is watching. I dismissed the unsettling feeling, chalking it up to the long drive and the stress of the holiday season. After all, it was just me, my Aunt Mary, my Uncle Martin, and their 2 children, Jacob and Lily. A family gathering, just like any other. That night, after a delicious dinner, we gathered in the living room by the fire. The lights from the Christmas tree blinked cheerfully, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Jacob and Lily, both young teenagers, were busy exchanging presents and laughing. My Aunt Mary sat beside me, sipping her wine, while my Uncle Martin dozed off in his armchair. But even amidst the laughter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house, despite its warmth, seemed to hold its breath as if it were waiting for something to happen. Around midnight, when the festivities began to wind down and the house grew quiet, I decided to head to bed. But as I lay there in the darkness of the guest room, I found myself unable to sleep. The wind outside howled fiercely, rattling the windows. The house groaned and shifted as if responding to the storm outside. I tossed and turned, staring at the shadowy corners of the room. I was about to close my eyes when I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping. I froze. It was coming from somewhere in the house, but where? I strained my ears, hoping it was just the wind or a tree branch scratching against the window. But it wasn't. The sound was too deliberate, too slow. Almost like someone was knocking. I sat up in bed, my pulse quickening. The house was silent again. Too silent. I could hear my breath in the stillness, the storm raging outside. I couldn't ignore it. My curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly slipped out of bed, my bare feet brushing against the cold wooden floor. I moved cautiously down the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath me. The sound was still there, faint but persistent, coming from the direction of the basement. I paused at the top of the stairs. The basement door stood at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. It was odd. Everyone had gone to bed, and the house had been locked tight for hours. Why would the door be open now? The tapping continued, now louder, almost as if it were calling to me. I stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding in my chest. The basement was rarely used. It was cold and musty, filled with old boxes and forgotten things. Yet the thought of it now, it felt wrong. There was something about the way the house seemed to shift, as if it was holding its breath, that made me uneasy. I couldn't help myself. I had to know what was down there. I slowly made my way to the door and pushed it open. A cold gust of air greeted me, the smell of damp earth and mildew lingering in the stairwell. I stepped forward, each footfall echoing in the hollow silence. The wind outside seemed to pick up, rattling the windows and causing the shadows to dance in eerie patterns on the walls. The tapping was now louder, more urgent. It sounded like it was coming from below, deep within the basement. I hesitated for a moment, every instinct telling me to turn back. But something compelled me to continue. I couldn't explain it, but I needed to know what was making that sound. I descended the stairs, each step creaking beneath me. The darkness enveloped me, and the air grew colder with each breath I took. As I reached the bottom, the tapping stopped. I looked around, my eyes straining to adjust to the dim light. There, in the center of the room, stood a figure. It was a man, his back to me, motionless. He didn't appear to notice my presence. His clothes were old, ragged, and his hair was long and unkempt. He was staring at the far wall, his body rigid, as if in a trance. I opened my mouth to call out, but my voice failed me. The air felt thick, oppressive, and I couldn't bring myself to speak. Suddenly the man turned around. I gasped, stumbling back as the figure locked eyes with me. His eyes were black, empty, hollow, like two dark voids that seemed to absorb all light. There was no emotion, no life behind them, just a cold, terrifying emptiness. I froze, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest. The man didn't speak, didn't even blink. He just stared at me with that unholy gaze, and in that moment, I felt as though my very soul was being drained away. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the man turned away and began walking toward the far corner of the basement. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who was this man? What was he doing here? The figure stopped by the wall, and for a moment, everything was still. Then he simply vanished, like smoke, dissipating into the cold, empty air. I stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The room was silent now, the tapping gone, the figure nowhere to be seen. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled backward up the stairs, my legs weak with fear. When I reached the top, I slammed the basement door shut behind me and bolted into the living room. My aunt and uncle were still awake, and they rushed to my side when they saw the panic in my eyes. I could barely speak. I tried to explain what I had seen. The man in the basement, his hollow eyes, the eerie stillness. But they only looked at me with confusion. We checked the basement. The door was locked. The room was empty. There was no trace of anyone. No footsteps in the snow outside. Nothing. The police were called. They searched the entire house, the surrounding property, and even interviewed the neighbors. But they found nothing. No missing persons report, no signs of an intruder, no explanation for the events I had witnessed. The strangest part? The house itself. It had a history, a long one. My aunt told me that the house was built in the early 1900s, and there were rumors, whispers really, about strange disappearances that occurred every Christmas Eve. Over the years, people had vanished without a trace, and the locals had grown wary of the house. Some even said it was cursed, but no one had ever been able to prove anything. No one could explain the disappearances. It was always just stories, until that night. To this day, I can't help but wonder, Was the man in the basement a ghost? Was it some kind of twisted manifestation of the house's dark history? Or was it something far more sinister, a presence that waits for each Christmas Eve to claim another victim? I don't know. But every Christmas, when the snow starts to fall and the wind begins to howl, I can't shake the feeling that whatever I saw that night is still out there, waiting, watching. Story 3. The Ghost of Christmas Past. I still can't get the image out of my head, the shadowy figure that appeared at the foot of my bed that Christmas Eve. It happened 5 years ago, but every time the holiday season rolls around, the memories come flooding back. The terror I felt that night lingers, as fresh as it was then. I had just moved into an old, creaky house on the outskirts of town. It was a small 2-bedroom cottage built in the late 1800s, and it had always intrigued me with its weathered charm. When I found out it was available for rent, I didn't hesitate. I was new to the area and wanted a quiet place to live while I adjusted to the slow-paced life of this small town. The house, however, had a reputation. It was known for its age and history, but there were whispers too. Whispers about the woman who had once lived there. Her name was Eleanor Harris, and she was said to have died in the house during Christmas Eve many years ago. There were no clear answers about her death, only rumors of a tragic end. Some said she died of a broken heart. Others claimed it was a result of foul play. Whatever the truth, Eleanor's presence was said to linger in the house. I didn't let the rumors deter me. I convinced myself that it was just that, rumors. After all, I wasn't a believer in ghosts. I figured if Eleanor's spirit was still around, she'd be harmless, just a part of the house's long history. But the first Christmas in the house proved me wrong. It was a cold, snowy December evening when the oddities began. The house, though charming, was old and drafty, and the wind outside howled through the cracks in the windows. I had just finished decorating my tiny Christmas tree and was settling down with a cup of hot cocoa when I heard a faint sound coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was the wind or perhaps an animal outside, but then I heard it again, this time louder. A soft thud, like footsteps on the floorboards. I paused, the mug in my hand trembling. I knew I was alone. There was no one else in the house. The sound continued, slow and deliberate, getting closer. My heart began to race as I stood up, cautiously making my way down the hallway. Every step I took seemed to echo in the silence, adding to the sense of dread that was settling over me. The hallway was dark, save for the faint glow of the Christmas tree lights from the living room. I looked around, but there was nothing there. The house seemed still, as though nothing had moved. Then, as I stood at the foot of the stairs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the top of the stairs, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned gown, her dark hair cascading down her back. She stood motionless, her face hidden in the shadows. I froze. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a trick of the light? A reflection? But no. The figure was real. I could feel it. There was a heaviness in the air, a weight that pressed against my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. But the woman didn't respond. She simply stood there, silent and still. I took a step forward, my legs trembling beneath me. My mind screamed at me to turn and run, but my body wouldn't obey. I had to know who or what this was. The woman slowly lifted her head, and my breath caught in my throat. Her face was pale, almost ethereal, and her eyes, those eyes, were hollow, empty. They stared at me with an intensity that seemed to reach into my very soul. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The woman took a slow step toward me, her feet gliding across the floor without making a sound. My heart pounded in my ears as I backed away, but she didn't stop. Her gaze never left mine. It was as if she was pulling me toward her, drawing me in with an invisible force. Just as she reached the top of the stairs, she disappeared. I blinked, my heart racing. She was gone. I rushed up the stairs, looking into every room, but there was no sign of her. No one was there. I went back to the living room, my mind spinning, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I had seen her. She was real. The rest of the night was a blur. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with questions. Who was the woman? Was she Eleanor? And if so, what did she want? The next few days were no better. Strange things started happening around the house. Doors would open by themselves, cold drafts would seep through the walls, and sometimes I'd hear faint whispers in the dead of night. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched never left me. On Christmas Eve, things took an even darker turn. I had decided to spend the night alone, hoping the quiet would help me clear my head. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier. The temperature dropped, and a strange unease settled over me. I sat by the fire, trying to focus on a book, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The room seemed to darken, and the shadows on the walls grew longer, more distorted. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, so faint it was almost imperceptible, but unmistakable nonetheless. It came from behind me. "Help me!" My blood ran cold. I slowly turned around, but the room was empty. My eyes scanned the corners of the room, the fireplace, the door, but there was no one there. "Help me!" The voice whispered again, this time louder. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was coming from the corner of the room just beyond the shadows. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and slowly moved toward it. My breath caught in my throat as I reached out, my hand trembling, and then I saw it, the woman. She was standing there, just beyond the shadow, her pale face staring at me with those same hollow eyes. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. She reached out toward me, her cold fingers brushing against my skin. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, but the woman didn't move. She just stood there, watching me, her presence suffocating the air. "Why?" I whispered, the question escaping before I could stop it. "What do you want?" For a long moment there was nothing. The room was silent except for the crackling of the fire. Then slowly the woman spoke. "Help me, and you will be free." The word sent a chill down my spine. Free? From what? I didn't understand. But before I could ask, the woman vanished once more, leaving me alone in the room. I spent the rest of the night awake, the terror clawing at my mind. I couldn't ignore the message. Help me, and you will be free. The next morning, I did some research. The town's historical society had records about the house, and I found the truth about Eleanor Harris. She had been a young woman, married to a wealthy businessman. But on Christmas Eve, her husband had vanished without a trace. She was left alone in the house, and the rumors said she had been driven mad by his disappearance. In her desperation, Eleanor had taken her own life. The town had never solved the mystery of her husband's disappearance. But now I knew. Eleanor wasn't just a ghost. She was a soul trapped in the house, unable to find peace. And she wanted help. I don't know what happened that night, or if I ever truly helped her. But after that Christmas, the house was different. The shadows seemed to lift. The cold draft stopped, and the whispers faded. Eleanor's presence, though never fully gone, was less oppressive. But every Christmas I remember her, and every year I wonder, did I really help her? Or was she just a warning, a glimpse into something darker, something beyond our understanding?